Here we go. We're recording.
It's exciting.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. We're here to talk about the role of the parent in home education. You know what that means, Steve?
That your dad is stopping by to...
Yeah. He's going to educate me some. He's going to learn me something.
Learn you something.
I've got a poem.
Well, I don't have to guess at that anymore.
No, yeah, it's a bit old hat, right? Which the old hats are the most comfortable ones. Okay, so here we go. This poem is entitled Not of School Age, and it's by Robert Frost.
That guy again.
Yes, always. Around bend after bend, it was blown woods and no end. I came to but one house. I made but the one friend. At the one house, a child was out, who drew back at first in doubt, but spoke to me in a gale that blew so he had to shout. His cheek smeared with apple sand, a part apple in his hand, he pointed up the road as one having war command. A parent, his gentler one, looked forth on her small son, and wondered with me there what now was being done. His accent was not good, but I slowly understood something where I could go. He couldn't, but I could. He was too young to go, not over 4 or so. But would I please go to school and the big flag they had, you know, the big flag, the red, white, and blue flag, the great sight. He bet it was out today. And would I see if he was right? I like this one in particular for this conversation because the jumping off point is this part right here toward the end that to me is a way of conceiving of the role of the parent in home education, where he says his accent was not good, but I slowly understood something where I could go. He couldn't, but I could. I think that, among other things, the parent in home education is the one who is able to go farther than the student, and because of that ability, is able to usher the student along, sometimes with them, but then also at times able to say, oh yeah, I've been down that road before, so I know where it leads, and go ahead and go down that. That's a good trail to go down. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, it's interesting to me that homeschooling was the form of schooling for eons, right? In Western civilization, and then we moved towards sort of a more universal notion of education, that everybody ought to be educated, not just some. And at the same time, we're industrializing ourselves so that more work was possible. Mom could do more than, quote unquote, just stay at home and teach little one.
Right.
So the notion of parents seeking out and turning over to, for all intents and purposes, a stranger, the education of their children, they still retain. I just don't have a time in mind when parents weren't hovering over their child's homework or asking them the ubiquitous, so what did you learn in school today, Johnny?
Right.
I don't think there was ever a moment when parents just completely kicked off the teacher's shoes, right? And so when you see this resurgence, and I think the reason we've chosen this and several other topics, in part because our listenership seems to favor the homeschooling individual, not to scare away anybody that's involved with quote unquote traditional classroom instruction, but we got a number of homeschoolers that follow us. But it is a growing recovering art.
Yeah.
That some parents are choosing to dismiss the stranger and say, no, I can do this. But it begs all kinds of questions about being a parent
Yeah.
and being a teacher. And I like
Right.
where the poem has taken you, that at its heart, I think what most young people from 5 to 17 are seeking from a parent who is also homeschooling them is this sense of identification
Mm-hmm.
that 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 I've been there, I get it, I understand it. As your parent, I have certain expectations for you, but as your teacher, I'm just one who's going ahead of you, trying to lead you. You know, the whole notion behind educate. I'm trying to bring you along a path
Right.
that I'm familiar with and that I want you to enjoy, if that's possible.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, okay, when it comes to um, this dichotomy, or this, I don't know, this issue of home education, um, I think that we have, because the water that we've been raised in has not kept the terms exactly uh, precise. Um, I think we're in danger of falling into a different sort of understanding about the role of a parent and teacher than the one that the notion of school is based on, right? And so let me unpack that a little bit. When I so I'm a teacher, right? I'm a parent of my children, but I'm a teacher of other people's children. And the school where I teach has a very clear idea or principle to lead that conversation between parents and teachers and what we view our roles to be. And it's a Latin phrase, and it is in loco parentis, right? And what that phrase means, Steve, I know you know, but for our listeners, the Latin is in place of the parent, right? So that is, I, as a teacher, am a sort of sub parent, a subcontractor for the parent who always maintains the primary role of educator, or I'm sorry, the role of primary educator, right? So even a parent who farms out the education of their child, or sends their child to a teacher because they believe that a teacher can do a better job than they can, it's still, even then, the parent's primary responsibility, right?
Right,
Not
right.
the teacher's. Um, so with home education, then what I think about that in this conversation is that that's important to keep in mind, because what we don't want to do is say to parents, okay, you've been a parent up to this point, but now you're taking on the additional role of teacher, right? No, no, no. You were always the parent, and the teacher is a sort of ancillary helper position that has come along in relatively recent years.
Yeah, I
Um,
think
is that too hard a line?
no, I think that it's an analogy might help. The difference, let's say, between a fairly large company and a quote unquote mom and pop shop,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? The roles of a company of any size, let's say 100 employees,
Mm-hmm.
Joe on the floor employee, when he has, let's say, some sort of a payroll question, goes to the payroll department, and there's
Right.
someone assigned to answering his questions, dealing with his issues, et cetera. Or if it's a question about the production of what he's doing, he's got a direct report, right? He has somebody, his overseer, his supervisor, his foreman, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
He knows where to go, and the roles are all divided out. He would rarely approach the head of the company
Right.
with his problem.
Yes.
He would at least work his way up through the layers.
Right.
Right. And so the mom and pop shop, if they hire Joe, if mom or pop is is nearby, and they are, because there's just the 3 or 4 people in the store,
Yeah.
there's no department to go to. You go to the dude and you say,
That's
hey.
right.
So what has been traditional for us for quite some time now is more of a corporate vision of education, where we've got, I hesitate to say experts, but that's the notion anyway. We have
Yes.
roles divided out, where you've got a principal, even a vice principal. We knew in the large public schools I went to, it was the vice principal you did not want to meet,
Right.
because
Sure.
all the disciplinary aspects of administration have been delegated to him. The principal didn't want to have to deal with it. Often, if you were talking to the principal, you were having a good time. He was giving you an extra quarter to spend at lunch, or he was just chatting with you, being friendly.
Right.
If you're at this other individual's office, there's serious conversations that are probably going to not, and pardon the pun, end well.
Sure.
My end was not going to be well. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So you and I, and most of us, probably within the listenership, grew up within this somewhat more corporate mind frame. The home life was very much the mom and pop, directly answerable to mom or dad. But bringing education out of that corporate setting into a home setting does run the risk of confusion of roles. There doesn't need to be confusion, because all the roles are subsumed into one individual, right?
Right.
But as dangerous as it is for a parent to think that they've somehow taken on a role they didn't previously have, which is what you're addressing, there's also the danger of not recognizing that the relationship of a parent with the child who's seeking to directly educate, to school their child, that relationship has to grow.
Yeah.
There's more aspects to it now than when you were farming it out, as you said earlier. Right. My role as a parent, when I'm asking somebody else to educate my child, is support. You need help with your homework. What did you learn in school today? Why did I get a phone call from your teacher? Let's address this homework issue. Whatnot. Very much a support role, almost a cheerleader if it's going well.
Sure.
But when the child comes home and stays at home, and that's also their environment of learning, then other modes of relationship start to come forth. And I think when homeschooling gets frustrating to some parents, it's because they're relying too much on the authority of their parenting rather than the methodological variety that a teaching situation should bring out in them.
Okay.
There's a moment to put the foot down and say, we got to get some work done.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be all heavy. That's one of the attractive things about homeschooling, right? Is there is an opportunity to relate to my child in a way I haven't done so when they were in school.
Right. Okay. So let's try and get as specific as we can here. When we're moving, as we've outlined them, I'm kind of thinking of education in two different spheres or two different modes: the institutional mode and the domestic mode. Right. The sort of corporate, I think, is the word that you used, and the home. So as a parent is transitioning their child or children from the institutional mode to the domestic mode of education, what is that parent's role, right? What things should they be doing? I have one thing that comes to mind immediately, and that is to share responsibility with the student, right, with the child. So to give that child some responsibility and then ensure that the child is fulfilling their responsibility.
Yeah, I think that you're able to, as a parent, to know a lot more about your child and their proclivities.
Mm-hmm.
In the institutional setting, there's sort of just standards, right?
Right.
A fifth grader ought to be able to,
Right.
and some can and some can't, and so that requires institutional adjustment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're you're breaking out of that and saying, by golly, I've been living with this kid their whole life, and I and the child have certain goals and focal points
Mm-hmm.
that can be used much more richly in this one-on-one setting than is possible in that classroom of 15 or 25 or 35 kids.
Right.
And so one of the privileges and delights of home education is being able to hone in on the interests of my child, and I guess this is kind of going to lead right into the practical thing I would talk about. You are much more capable of thinking constantly about the ends
Good.
of a home education. Where is
Good.
it that both the student and I are trying to go? As the parent, I have goals, I have desires, I have what I think are wise ends in mind.
Mm-hmm.
The quicker I can develop in my child the wisdom and virtue necessary for them to get there, which is what I think you mean when you say responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's responsibility with skill. So
Right.
part of my job is developing them into able students or
Mm-hmm.
able people capable of whatever responsibility I lay upon them.
Right.
And I have a lot more opportunity to judge that than just the paper trail or the in class 45 minutes a day type thing. So there's just so much more that I can do with that as a parent than is possible in mine and your role as teachers in a classroom. We're dependent on the parent still keeping tabs on things, right?
Mm-hmm.
As classroom teachers, the parents just saying, "Hey, I'm not just keeping tabs. I get to move this forward.
Yeah.
I have the hands on the steering wheel. I'm not a backseat driver anymore."
Right. Okay.
And
Dude. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. I grabbed four practical, actual things from what you were just saying about the role of the parent, and I want to summarize them or restate them before I lose them. Okay.
yep,
Okay. So here's what I heard you say. Goal setting, right? Remembering the ends of education is certainly one of the roles of the parent in the domestic mode of education.
and
Um,
when you have your other three out, let me come back to that one for just a moment.
okay, sure thing. Um, the way that you talked about goal setting, though, made it obvious, and you hinted at it, although you didn't come right out with it, that that goal setting is going to be so precise because it's the parent who is responsible for evaluating the child, right? Assessing the child in all of the facets that the parent finds meaningful. Um, the third was that it is the parent's role to stoke or nurture the interests of the child. And lastly, that the parent should or is able to set the pace of the education in a way that they were not able to in the institutional mode.
Yep, yep. And that one to me is a big
That's
deal
huge.
as well, right?
It's huge.
Because now it's what is appropriate for my child, not what is appropriate for this classroom of children. And that might mean speeding it up or slowing it down. It's entirely determined by that one soul, as opposed to a part of it. And I mean, you're missing some things when you're not a part of that community of souls. But a benefit to the one-on-one at home is that to go back to the ends for a moment. I think this is a really big deal. Whenever a parent goes out seeking to shop it out, to find a school for their child, they obviously should be very curious as to what the ends are as seen by the school. Why do you have the curriculum you have? What kind of a student are you trying to produce? Are you a college prep kind of school? Are you, what philosophy is behind your, is this Montessori based, and what's that mean? Is this, well, I'm not going to cover all of the
whatever.
Right. Yeah. But what philosophy is, which is almost always in the end about the ends, the quote unquote product or fruit of the school, the graduate, the ideal graduate, is how I often talk about it. Now you as a parent, the only vision for this homeschool is the one you implement, right? You don't have to go find one that agrees with you. It is you. You are the committee.
That's right. You're wearing all the hats.
But so on the one hand, that's incredibly freeing. On the other hand, there's a responsibility there. And I see many folks who want some of the immediate benefits of homeschooling, the hands-on, I can teach what I want them to know, that kind of thing. And they don't take time to think through the final ends or the ultimate ends. What kind of a graduate here? I'm taking over the education of my child when they're in second grade. I just want them to get through the second grade. Well, how do you know what that looks like? What for you? What is a second grade education to do? Well, get them to third grade. Okay, but what does that mean? And I'm not trying to scare anybody out of homeschooling. I'm just saying that the more you contemplate that child when they're 18 will be, the more likely you are to arrive there.
That's right. Begin with the end in mind, as it's often said.
Yes. And because education has become this big thing, and it to some extent has suffered from its political nature, there's a whole lot of philosophies out there, right? And I think part of the fear of homeschooling is that my child at the end of their education, whatever that, and for some people they're only doing this through grade 6 or grade 8 or whatnot, but just for the sake of argument, we say through the 12th grade. So obviously at the end of 12th grade, for many people is at least the desire that my child, if it's what they need, is ready to go on to college. And so then they start looking at the standards, the ends of institutional schools. And I don't know that that's bad as a activity in comparison and in thought and in brainstorming. I just want to almost overemphasize the fact that a parent involved in homeschooling has the freedom to, and it sounds scary to some people, all but chuck all of that for what you want. And if it looks, I've known so many people do homeschooling so many different ways. I would say that the single most common factor in success in homeschooling has been a very rich and full vision of the end.
Good.
And so to me, the most practical thing I can say is, especially now, a faculty meeting is one thing, right? You try and get unanimity of thought in a faculty meeting. you've got way more skills than I do.
Right.
But a quote unquote faculty meeting of a homeschool, mom and dad sitting down, even if only one of them is perhaps the most active in the educative process of the homeschooling, they both ought to be talking regularly about goals, desires, what's going well, what's getting them to their end, and what isn't. What more do you need from me? Hey, spouse, how can I help, etc. There should be quite a bit of unity in the faculty
That's
meetings
right.
of homeschool. So,
Good.
and my wife, who's done quite a bit of homeschooling, has often joked about her threat for the, if things go better today, you might have to talk to the principal when he gets home.
Right.
Thanks, dear. I really appreciate you
Right.
casting me in that. But
That's
but
funny.
but that is the reality, right? That
Yes.
is it's humorous only because there's truth there that we own this thing that I don't have the luxury that a mom or dad might have when their kid is off at somebody's school of going, oh, that school, there goes
Right.
the administration to get to that teacher's just a bad teacher.
It's
I
on you.
just, yeah. if
That's
the
right.
kid's got a bad teacher, the parent needs to have a parent teacher conference and
That's
get it
right.
settled right now. And
Sure.
communication shouldn't be an issue. So,
Good. Awesome. Well, okay. So I think we need to record another episode, Steve. And the question needs to be should I be homeschooling my child in preparation for college? Right? Should college readiness be the benchmark that I'm aiming for as a homeschooling parent? But because I think you've uncovered some interesting ideas about the ends of education and about that one in particular. But to recap, those who are seeking to do home education of their children should confer responsibility, set goals for the child, evaluate the child, stoke that child's natural interests or nurture their interests, and set the pace of education.
Get your education. Backwoods education.